one of the principles, habits, or rituals that differentiates your unique approach to engineering, and what is it, and when did you start doing that? And so I'm curious for you guys if you think about, as you've either mentored people or talked to people about, oh, there's this surprising thing that I do that makes a lot of sense I never thought about before. Um, does anyone have like a thing or a process that they feel is particularly interesting that they like and would talk about?
In terms of like engineering, I know a lot of it like in terms of like time management and using like spreadsheets and color coding stuff. That's less like time or less like engineering and more just like how I manage my time and like
Okay.
don't lose track of like what I'm doing and just making sure like I have big bright colors that I have up on a screen that I can see when something's coming up because I'm not gonna remember. Um, I think engineering maybe the thing that's different is I whenever I'm architecting and thinking of stuff like forward facing with projects, usually I try to like schedule like near the end of my day,
Hmm.
like the plan ahead architecture think about it stuff. So that way whenever I inevitably hit that wall of what do I actually do, because you're always going to hit some kind of wall and like some kind of tough question, I then have that question to chew on when I go to the
Hmm.
gym. And like between sets, I
Okay.
can sit, I can go for a walk, get the blood pumping, move, think, and then I'm doing it on the go. I'm also not in front of my computer getting frustrated why it's not working. It's just like a good mental refresher and also just helps me think better. Um, Obviously, it's not always feasible because sometimes you don't really get the control when all of your architecture meetings are. But it's something I like
Yeah.
to try to do if there's, especially if there's like, or if there's something that's been lingering around the team, make sure to revisit it before the end of the day, and then it's
Hmm.
there for the gym, and then I can hopefully bring it
Yeah.
in the morning.
I love that you said that because I feel like I probably have come up with a higher percentage of ideas while walking the dogs than any other single thing. And I really like the idea of taking the time to list out here are the things I'm going to work on later so that when you do get stuck, you have a process to go to. Here are the things I'm supposed to be thinking about while I'm kind of semi unplugged and on kind of background processing time. That's great. That's really cool. I see some nodding heads. Does that resonate for everybody in terms of, you know, alternate times to think about the problem?
Yeah, definitely something I second that.
Yeah, I think it's really important to take that time with the rumination over something and or actually thinking through things. I think that's one of the areas where I often see more junior folks um, getting stuck or running into issues is they jump in and start working on something without necessarily like planning out the approach. And then that often is what leads to sometimes smaller cases or bigger ones getting missed
Hmm.
or not getting to a point and then like kind of going down a rabbit hole and not really knowing where to go from there. So I think that is a really important step in the process.
I think that lens thinking about like what you've seen junior people do and then like oh, I used to do that, or here's a way to get around that. I think that's a pretty good lens to get into this question. Because I know one of the things I've heard Josh say is like a difference is the junior people not really knowing how to Google things properly, and that like the idea that if you get an error, like sometimes just literally pasting that into Google and just seeing what you get can be some of the answer, not all the answer. Um, but maybe it's interesting that we're going down this path of what are the non-technical skills that you have around managing your day and managing your pipeline road. It's pretty interesting. Anything else like that, kind of in the non-tech area?
Um, this is like a throwaway one that ends up being really useful for me is I put a like a shortcut in my Google Chrome browser so I can do at Jira and the ticket number to pull it up instead of having to like go hunt around or like open Jira and search within that. As like one of the little tools that I've like made to kind of work around that. And I think yeah, like the next big thing is always just like the organization of like the information and kind of the tools in general because there are tons and tons of tools
Mm-hmm.
that like we might have to use at any time. Secret links, Ngrok, jumping in and out of like Amazon and different like resources in there and things, and like
Sure.
trying to keep all of those things organized is a lot of the time probably like one of the things. Like being able to go and find those things, jump into like assist across different projects and things like that uh, took a lot of organization, I think, starting at Caxi when I had like a bunch of different projects
Yeah.
that I might have to like jump back and forth between, or work on at a time or within short
So
succession.
what's your home base? Do you work through like do you work in Chrome and bookmarks, or is it do you have a separate doc, or is it like pinned messages? Like what's your organizing principle for everybody?
Um, I started and mostly use a lot of bookmarks in Chrome, like
Okay.
browser bookmarks, and then I've moved towards kind of like managing I guess like essentially just like my own notes and documentation for like some other things. But like anything that's like a web-based tool or link, I try to use like a bookmark, and then anything lately that's been, I guess, like maybe information or just kind of like process and stuff like that, I've been trying to like take my own notes um, to kind of like organize my thoughts around those things in like
Okay.
a note tool that I've started using called Obsidian, just like a
Okay.
markdown
Interesting.
tool.
Huh. Yeah, I just use the Mac Notes app. Is that what it's called, right?
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah, so
and
effectively the same
someone
thing.
Yeah, someone terrified me the other day when they said that they'd reached the limit of the Notes app.
I
I
think that
can't
was
remember who that
Megan.
was. That was Megan,
Oh,
I
and
think
it was
so.
and she had kind of like you had to like take a breath with how many notes she had, but I think it stops at whatever that 32K number is or something. And I was like, oh no, that's a problem for me. I'm using this thing a lot. Um, but so Obsidian, maybe that's the grown up version that we can all jump to or something. Um, Chris, how about you? What's your home base? What do you organize yourself around?
Uh,
That's right.
I don't know. For stuff related to work, I don't really do anything special.
Okay.
I always have a basic text editor open,
Hmm.
um, just so in a meeting or whatever, I can quickly switch over to it, dump some thoughts out,
Yeah.
and then just like quick like empty lines to separate it from any other thoughts. I probably literally have thoughts in the same text file from like 5 or 6 years ago, so it's like on running. It never really goes away. But outside of that, um, I use Google Keep a lot to take notes,
Okay.
um, and organize like to-do lists because I'm the kind of person who has multiple to-do lists in various
Hmm.
categories, and if I
Yep.
don't track those, I will just be overloaded and never get anything done.
Yeah.
And Trello also is something I use a lot to try to track and move progress for things like in my personal life.
Yeah. It's funny. It's interesting. I think we're talking about something that we are all using in some way or another on a day-to-day basis, and yet probably have never talked about out loud. Am I right? Have you never shared these, right? And so I wonder, like, is this a mystery worth mentoring and talking about with people? It's like as you get started in your engineering career, like, hey, just pay attention. One of the most important things to do is to stay organized. And that sounds ridiculous. Like, shouldn't it be about, oh, I'm learning a new framework every weekend? No, no, it's like get yourself organized so that when you do your work, you're not like, it's becoming cliche, but this idea of context switching, like you can save yourself a little bit of that cost if you've instead of remembering to remember, I just go to this bookmark or this notes app or Obsidian, right? Is that what we learned today? I go to this thing that tells me about, okay, that's right, that's where I was, and I can kind of pick up from there. Um, is that so? Do you guys talk about that in rooms or projects or when people get stuck? Like, tell me about how that makes it down to the juniors.
I don't know if I've ever explicitly said it, although I mean it is a good point of like I feel like you can't be a lead if you're not organized because I'm the whole you organize a team and you run them.
True.
I mean it's kind of like in the job description if you can't do it,
Yeah.
like we wouldn't be in the position we're in. But I
Yeah.
think it is definitely a critical piece. I think the other piece that maybe isn't talked about or I haven't really thought about is like communication skills in terms of like
Yeah.
as engineers or a lot of engineers who don't have particularly good like communication skills, but in terms of being good at your job and doing what you're doing, it is important to like how do you
Hmm.
disseminate complicated architecture in a way that is digestible either quickly without having like the world's longest essay in Slack, or
Right.
you're talking to a client who's not not tech heavy. How do you explain it to a way that gets the point across while not also drowning them at the same time, and also communicate with the team and the PM and everyone else. How do you disseminate information? Like communication is
Yeah.
super super critical.
How about like what's a symptom of someone who isn't doing this?
What's a good question?
Isn't doing this being which part?
Isn't doing the self-organization part. They're
Hmm.
just sort of every day is Groundhog Day. They wake up and whatever is in front of them they do or something. Like what? How can you tell? Like actually, you know what you might need to do is like think about organizing yourself here a little bit.
I feel like it could be like when it comes, maybe it's not as noticeable on like in sprints where there's like a lot of like small individual, like, oh, we're doing UI updates here and there, but when there's like big features that like span multiple sprints, if you're
Hmm.
not organized and thinking of how does this one thing affect everything else, you think in the ticket and in terms of here's the bug I have and not what is the actual symptom of this and what is the reason this happened? Why was this written originally the way it was in the grander scheme of thing with the whole feature? Because maybe it's not
Right.
a bug, maybe it was built that way on purpose because of something else somewhere else. And if you're not organized, you're not keeping an eye on things, you're definitely not going to find that.
Hmm.
Yeah, I think people that live in the Groundhog Day world, to use your analogy, Mike, kind of end up being people who are more at risk for regressions to Tony's
Hmm.
call out because they aren't um, either remembering or thinking about the bigger picture and how something connects to another piece. And those are also the people that are probably at risk for replicating existing code because they aren't necessarily like going back and thinking
Oh,
about
sure.
where was this done previously, am
Yeah.
I recreating a component or a similar helper function that already exists because I'm just
Hmm.
like focused on what I'm doing in the here and now kind of a thing.
Yeah, it does seem like at least the organizational pieces are probably skills that I guess like I would say I developed more as a lead, and kind of like being in a position where always have been organizing, I guess, like requirements and like the
Hmm.
work itself, with my role at Caxi and in my previous position, um, which I'm sure ends up giving additional benefits to my organization or ability to like work
Yeah,
and like the
sure.
actual tasks day to day. But I do think that assuming like a sprint and like tickets are created and organized in a manner that like that might be where some of that disconnect comes from where like the ticket should be the organization I think that we're talking
Yeah.
about probably for like others outside of the lead positions in some ways, um, and then like they don't have to focus so much on like trying to like keep organized. They can focus more on moving through tasks
Huh.
that are like given to them or something probably.